Welcome back. Now that we have the Hyperion Project game completely written, we have got all of Zach's level put into the game. We've got all of Zach's game rules placed into the game, and everything's playable. At this point, everybody kind of has an idea of what we did, and if you'd like to, you could start working on your own game. But we're going to throw a bonus at you. This is a game design class using C# and XNA. Well, you can't really have a game design class if you don't know how to design a game. And I am not talking about from the coding point of view. We're going to show you how to code, but I'll tell you what, you can be a coding master, but you may not know diddly about creating a game, something that's entertaining, has replay value, etc. So we have brought in Mr. Zach Parrish, and he is going to talk about that, as we have done a lot of work with Epic Games and other companies in regards to, well, let's just say game-related material. And with all the experience he's got, he's going to share with you how the Hyperion Project was put together and talk about just a general overview of designing games.
All right, well, let's get started by taking a look at being a game designer in general, because you guys are all here because you want to be game programmers. But if you also want to design these games, there's some certain things that you have to be prepared to experience within yourself.
Right.
So first off,
and as a quick reminder,
yeah.
I just want to throw this out there. As a quick reminder to everybody, Zach's presenting this from the point of view now, not as a coder, but as the level designer, the game designer.
I'm the guy that you'll be working with in your game that you will love and hate, and probably a lot more the second than the first.
And that, instead of being another guy, could be the other half of your personality.
Yeah.
You end up being the one that has to put the game together once you have the engine in place.
That's right. If it's all you, you're still going to have to take these things into account. And, even if it sounds funny to be communicating with yourself, you've got to, kind of write out how gameplay elements are going to translate into code later. And
nowadays, games are so big that you really don't find just one person writing complicated adventure games that often anymore. Usually it's, you could have a couple buddies that get together with you.
Sure.
So this is very applicable when you have a small team.
And going even just a step further than that, even if you are the only person, don't let yourself stay the only person. Get somebody else involved. I don't care if it's your friend, your wife, a non-coding, non-gaming friend. Hopefully find somebody who does play games, but bounce ideas off them, and never, ever limit yourself to being the only person throwing ideas out, because your game will show that. So before, without anything else, let's just go ahead and move on. Do you have what it takes to be a game designer? One of the first key things you're going to need are good communication skills. And that kind of breaks down into the ability to portray your ideas clearly. If you have an idea of how the game should play, how it should feel, what kind of stories behind it, you need to be able to get these across to people, or even get them across to yourself. If you're writing a story, can you write it well enough that you can kind of get into it on your own? B, you need to be able to handle people hating your ideas.
Oh, that's huge.
You need to steel yourself for someone walking in and going, that is the worst idea I've ever heard, and you are going to destroy the company with ideas like that.
Maybe not that bad.
No. I stress. I would prepare myself for that level of hatred and how you're going to deal with it, because that way, when you stay up all night working on an idea and somebody comes in and goes, I'm just not feeling it, then that's not that big of a deal, because you were ready for them to come in and just throw a full wine bottle at the screen.
Right.
So be able to tolerate people not liking your ideas. You're going to have bad ideas just like you're going to have good ideas.
That's right, everybody does.
Yeah, so don't let that get you down. You need to be able to accept and work with the ideas of others. You should not be the only person throwing ideas into this game. And people are going to throw ideas at you that you may not agree with, but might be forced to incorporate or forced to work with, and you need to be flexible enough and to be able to kind of roll with those punches to put those into the project in a solid kind of way.
I was just going to say, this really ties over even to how I run 3D Buzz.
Mm-hmm.
Very often I'll come up with a new idea that I may think is entertaining for our members and or beneficial to them. I'll go downstairs. I'll throw the idea out to you guys. Sometimes you're very quick to come back with
what kind of money's in it?
Or have you lost your mind? Or that's an awful idea.
Plus expletives.
And yes, and there's been times that you've also said, that's not bad, but what about?
Yeah.
And the idea ends up getting enhanced, flushed out between the two of us as we bounce the idea back and forth.
And that's something that I'm going to be harping on a little bit later through this presentation, is remember that technically there's no such thing as a bad idea. There are ideas that won't work. There are ideas that are inappropriate, but there are no bad ideas, because sometimes even the worst ideas can either be turned into something good or can get somebody else's gears turning to make them think of a really good idea that they wouldn't have thought of if they hadn't heard your really bad idea in the first place.
It's called mutation.
There you go. All right, know when to back off on a topic. If you feel really strongly about something, but nobody else on your team really likes it, put it away and just accept defeat and go on with something else.
This one actually took me almost 4 years to master with my crew.
Actually, it did, because it'd be like, well, how about we do this? And everybody's kind of like, no, I don't think that's going to work. Yeah, but I really think we should do it. No, not really. It was just kind of hard. But you've got to be able to walk away and not have hard feelings and not carry grudges when something that you were really passionate about just isn't going to pan out.
Right.
If anything, put it in your back pocket, because it may come in handy later. Excuse me. So last one is knowing also when to stick to your guns. You know, maybe you've got an idea, and maybe not everybody agrees with you, but if you feel strongly enough about it, fight for it at least for a little while.
I can give an example, not game-related, but an example is the $1,000 contest for the Buzz TV The Daily News.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I walked in the room and threw that idea out. Hey, I want to give $1,000 away once a month to people who are watching the Daily News. We're going to do a little test, and whoever is the most accurate with answering the questions, they're going to win $1,000. And I want to give away $500 to the second place winner, and I want to give away a whole bunch of like 100s or 25s. Oh, man.
Yeah, and we all pretty much started throwing things at you.
And they did, and I did not back off.
Mm-mm.
I stuck to my guns because I was very passionate about the idea. And it panned out for a couple of months.
Well, not even going that far to the actual execution of it. You slowly, as you kept kind of harping on it, brought us around to your way of thinking. And understand that you may be able to do that as well. That if you are really passionate about something, and if you understand deeply that it does make sense to be included in your gaming project, then it's possible you may be able to sway people to your idea, even if they shun it at first.
Right. And it still is something I'm sticking to.
Right.
Still sticking to my guns because I very much love that particular idea. I want to see that idea back in circulation. But one of the things we found is that we have to have the time to dedicate to the show, make it better than what we had before, because we just couldn't sustain the people with what we were offering. We needed more in regards to just the entertainment value of the show itself. Then we could keep people staying, and this is a really interesting marketing technique, because then we could get other companies involved to help offset the money we'd be shelling out. And you would be getting something, the member would be getting something from watching these shows and learning something, because they'd have to be able to take these tests.
Right, and you may come up with an idea for your game in the same vein that really could just change the entire nature of the project.
Absolutely.
And make it exciting and make it the best game you can possibly make it. And when everybody in your team hears it the first time, they might be like, oh, well. But, stick with it.
You want to put the grenade resonator in there?
Yeah, well. All right, 2, respect for your teammates. This is an important one, and it's real easy to overlook, although it does kind of sound like common sense. First thing is you have to be able to understand their point of view. If you have other teammates as the designer or as the programmer, you're going to be speaking different languages to each other. And you need to be able to know where they're coming from. Like as a designer, I may go to Buzz and Logan and say, hey, it would be really cool if we could have vehicles in this text-based game.
Just so that I can point out those are the dreaded words. It would be cool if.
Yeah, or wouldn't it be cool if, or do you think we could, or can we, or any question that kind of starts off that way will make a programmer typically want to throw up. But anyways, like when they come back to me and they say, no, we can't, and here's why, I can't get into a snit. I've got to understand that they are the programmers, they understand the mechanics behind the engine, and I've got to be tolerant of their view in that regard. Now, again, it also ties back to the first thing I was talking about. I mean, if I really feel it would be the basis for the game, maybe I stick with it. But if not, if it was just something kind of cool that I'm not really willing to pick a battle for, then I walk away and go on to the next idea. Be willing to work with their input. If they tell you, no, you can't do it, or yes, you can, but you have to do it in this certain way, be ready to deal with that. We had, kind of a system for Hyperion at first where we were going to be able to use items. Where it was, pick up a PDA, and then you could use it in order to read it, and maybe if you used it again, you get a different message, and so on like that.
Right.
And we quickly found out that wasn't going to work out, and there'll be more on that later on in the presentation. But in the end, I still wanted to have these PDAs. I felt really strongly about that. It was a tried and true thing from Doom, so we were more or less borrowing it. And I like the way it felt, where it gives you the ability to have a personal backstory in an abandoned area.
Right.
So, to have notes that were left behind, voices from the past, if you will. So we found a way to work with the new spec for the game, which is, again, I'll talk about how the specs change a little later, where as soon as you pick something up, you automatically read it. But that was only because I was willing to work with this input that I was receiving back from my programmers. So finally, don't discourage feedback. And this is probably the most important point in respect for your teammates, is that, when they tell you that they don't like your idea, or that, you've done something that is not helping, or it could be anything, it could just be a critique of something you've done or working on. Don't get exasperated and try not to show any frustration whatsoever, because nobody on your team wants to frustrate you. They want to work with you. They want to have a positive kind of environment. And if by trying to guide you along the way, or maybe by telling you that they don't like this idea or that idea, if they notice that you're starting to get frustrated and that you don't like that, they will stop doing it. And that's the last thing you want, because you need that feedback coming in. So always be gracious in receiving any kind of feedback, positive or negative.
No, I was going to add something to that. This respect for your teammates. Zach has it at the moment applying for level designer and game programmer. Now, it could also apply for level designer to level designer.
Absolutely.
And in the world that I work in, programmer to programmer. Mm-hmm. These three things, boy, they go hand in hand with Logan and I every day.
If you have multiple programmers, you've got so many different ways of thinking about solving problems. And it's the same way with design, too. I might spec out a ship and be like, oh, this looks great, and another designer come and go like, actually, that looks like crap, and here's why. And I have to be able to accept that.
But in the world of programming, that's the worst world.
Sure.
Because every developer has a better way to do it. If you watch the forums, you'll find it on the forums every day. No matter who posts what, somebody else is going to come along with, if you just change this or if you change that. Now, everybody has their reasons for doing something.
Right.
And Logan and I, we'll go at it. Sometimes we'll go at it for an hour, all about just one particular object and how that object is going to handle interaction with other objects. And it can sometimes get a little heated.
I'm sure.
But, again, I have to try to understand his point of view.
Yeah, where he's coming from.
And he has to try to understand mine. And from that, if we work with one another, we generally come up with some sort of happy solution where in the end we rather incorporate just his ideas, my ideas, or we get a happy mix of the two together.
Hybrid.
That's right.
Now, I have noticed this, and this is just from kind of browsing around, even on 3D Buzz sometimes and various programming forums, just looking around a little bit on game dev and things like that, you are going to notice that programmers can be very snooty about the way they do things. And, if we can teach you guys to be anything, try to break the status quo, so to speak, and don't ever assume, one, that you know everything as far as solutions go, and don't assume that the guy who's doing it differently than you is ignorant in any way.
Right.
He may actually have a reason, and try to, maybe he is doing something that is a bit inefficient, and you could say, well, that is one way to do it, but here's another way to do it that might save you a few things, and now you've approached it in a way where they might go, oh, you're right, instead of going, oh, it's another, snooty programmer showing me how it should be done and that sort of thing, because you don't want to push people away. All right, anyways, so moving along, the next thing we've got is a focused but open mind. This is something you're going to have because ideas can start to stagnate. So force yourself to get a little crazy. Be willing to try new ideas. If somebody throws out an idea maybe you haven't heard, this is where it helps to get other people involved who aren't even gamers. Maybe you've got a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a husband, wife, whatever, or best friend, could be anybody, who's not much of a gamer, but you've already talked with them about, your project a little bit, maybe they voiced an interest. They might throw some crazy idea at you, so always be ready for those and be ready to, accept them and work with them. Look for ideas in your daily life. Maybe you see how, and I know this is really weird, but maybe you're walking around, the grocery store one day and you see how the stock boy is actually putting stuff on shelves and oriented. It makes you think to yourself, we could actually organize things in the game this way or things like that. Just look around for ideas wherever you can. And sometimes I like to try to keep a notebook with me in case I get a good idea. Force yourself to think creatively. Try to come up with one crazy idea every single day that you're working on a project, and then present it to people and see if don't go completely off the wall. Like, what if we just filled the game with bunnies? But
it'd be a great game.
It would be a great game.
It's been done. It's called Rayman.
Rayman already did it, and that was good. It worked really well for them. But, maybe you, just by saying that, now we've got this, if you guys have played through Hyperion a little bit, you say, well, what if there was a testing facility where they did have some rabbits they were performing experiments on? So maybe they're doing animal experimentation. So now we've actually just generated an idea. Yeah, just by saying something completely nuts, like, let's fill the game full of bunnies. So force yourself into situations like that. The next one, and this one it's almost like taken for granted, I think, is you need a lot of ideas. Good ideas or bad ideas are irrelevant because you will not know one from the other. If you assume that only 1% of your ideas are actually going to be valuable enough to put into the game, if you only come up with 10 ideas throughout the entire process, you've got one good idea around which to wrap your game. So you need a gigantic stack of ideas. You need hundreds, if not thousands of ideas so that you can have the highest number of good ideas and valuable ideas to put into your project. Next, bounce all of your ideas off your teammates, no matter how crazy they were. Like, even right there, because the little thing about filling the game with bunnies, that was spontaneous. I didn't have that one rehearsed, but I threw it out at Jason and we started talking, and that got me thinking. Don't assume that you can take an idea, keep it internal, and turn it into something gorgeous. Because you might get lucky, but in general, you can't do that. A game is something you're trying to provide to as many people as possible. If you're the only one who makes the game and you think it's good, then it's probably going to be only good for you, or people who are very much like you. So try to get as much input on every single idea as you can. And, again, this is something we've kind of already discussed. Think outlandishly. It keeps things fresh. Like, again, now fill the game full of carrots for the bunnies. Or, throw in that occasional crazy thought because it may give birth to the next really good idea for your game. All right, so moving along from here, finally, perseverance. This is something you've got to be ready for if you're going to design any kind of game whatsoever. And that's the first thing. It will not be easy. It is not a honeymoon. It is not all fun and games, so to speak. The game that you are working on, you will love on day 1, you'll like on day 2, and you'll hate by day 3. Now, just take that and stretch it out to whatever the length of your game span is.
Yeah, your game development cycle, and it's 6 months. Just imagine how much you're going to hate it then.
Yeah, by month 5.5, you're going to be writing somebody hate mail every day, and it happens.
I don't know about that, but yeah, you will get to a point where you just don't want to work on it no more because it's not fresh and new anymore.
That's right, and everybody loves fresh and new. And why do you go to the game store and buy a new game every month or so, or however often you buy games? Because you want that new experience. But you've had to sit here and work on this game that you now know by heart, and you got to keep working on it and keep working on it, and it will get old. Know that going in, but you got to work through that. Next, do it for the game, not to be a great game designer. You're doing it for the gaming experience and not necessarily for you. Don't ever make it about you. You want this game to be fun to as many people as you can.
It needs to be entertaining and engaging to the people that are going to be playing it.
That's right, and so you want as many people to get involved as you can.
That's right.
Don't make excuses. If you mess up, if you miss a deadline, if you don't do what you're told to do, accept it, apologize, and move on, but don't make excuses about it because you'll find yourself starting to lax off in other areas as well. So just, this is how you keep yourself focused by not letting yourself get too bogged down in successes or failures. You got to keep rolling until this whole thing is over.
Not only that, but your peers, they know when you're making excuses.
Oh, yeah. Anytime they say, you didn't get this done on time, or I asked you to change this over to this and you didn't do it, anytime you say something, well, I was thinking, or, well, I was going to, or anything like that, they know.
Yeah.
Just like when they're making excuses.
Starts to hurt credibility.
That's right, and you got to keep that credibility because if you lose your credibility, you lose the respect of your teammates, and then the whole team starts to suffer because of that. Walk away when you have to. And by that, I don't mean quit. Throw my hands up. I can't take this game anymore. No, I mean take a break. It might seem like you have to sit there and pull an all-nighter and you are chained to the desk and you cannot walk away. But you're going to suffer if you do that. You will suffer from stagnation because the mundane nature of having to do this over and over will get to you. It will sap your creative juices. So get up, walk away, go play a game, go jog, go work out for a while, go read a book. Go back to your inspiration, what made you love this game in the first place and the idea of it. Try to rediscover that feeling you had when you first started the project. But get up and get away from what you're working on for a little while when you need to. But don't let it mess up your time frame too much. Right. And finally, remember why you love games and why you hate them. If you're here, I'm hoping you're a gamer. I'm hoping that there's not a one of you here who is trying to learn how to program games, but you don't like games. At the same time, you should love games and you should hate games. I'm sure for every game that you can think of that was just a phenomenal experience and you loved every moment of gameplay, there's probably 5 other games that you plugged in and immediately wanted your money back.
Right.
And you need to keep those in mind. Keep the good things in mind and remember the bad things too, because there's going to be those moments when you realize, well, this game just wasn't worth it, and you don't want those types of experiences in your game.
Make sure you know why the game wasn't worth it. What was wrong with the experience? What made it bad for you?
That's right. Pick it apart. I mean, was it too hard? If so, how?
Like
how was it too hard?
Daikatana, as an example.
Oh, well, AI, right there.
There you go, the AI. They constantly got in the way, and you could actually screw it up so that you could never win the game.
That's right.
Because of the AI. So now if we're going to put in, our NPCs, we're going to need to make sure that they're a little more creative than that game.
Right.
And that you can kill them if they get in the way.
If you have some way to dislodge them from stuck areas.
Like a corner.
Yeah, these are things like that. This is what Cliffy B, Cliff Bleszinski, refers to as a shelf moment. Mm-hmm. You get to this point in the game where you cannot progress, or you're just sick of it, or something has been done that has destroyed the gaming experience for you. So you hit the eject button on your console, you put it back in its case, and you put it on its shelf where it will collect dust for the rest of the time that you own it.
That's a fact.
And you want to try your best to avoid having those in your game. Now, chances are, you got to remember, you can't please everybody.
Right.
So there are going to be some people who will play your game, look at it for 5 minutes, go, this sucks, and uninstall it from their PC or take it out of their Xbox and break it against a wall or something. So you just want to keep these to a minimum, and to do that, you have to remember why you hated those game experiences in the first place. All right, so that kind of wraps up the things that I think you need to have in order to be a successful game designer. If you can keep those very simple things in mind, you've already got a pretty easy path ahead of you. Now it's just working on those things, and those will help you to get more creative. But let's also talk about the creative process in general. First off, big, heavy, emboldened word here. We have iteration, the key to a successful game development. Now, what do I mean by iteration? Your game is not going to be built 1, 2, 1, 2, assemble, and done.
Right.
It doesn't go that way. You're going to have an idea that you're going to develop into the first stage of a game. It's going to actually be relatively playable, and you're going to try it out. You're going to see what works and what doesn't. Everybody's going to talk about it, and then you're all going to go right back to your workstations and work on it some more. From that, you're going to churn another version of the game, and then you're going to talk about what worked and didn't work on that, and then you're going to come back and do it all over again. You're going to make all these different iterations of the game, and throughout that process, you're going to turn into, kind of develop your final game. It's going to grow from that experience. So that's what I mean when I say iteration. And it's very, very important in any game development environment, especially involving any kind of team. First off, though, as a part of this iterative process, know going in that the game you imagined and the game that will result may not have a lot in common. We all want to make, you don't necessarily want to make the next Halo because, Halo's been done. You want to make the game that makes people go, hey, what? What was Halo? I don't remember that.
Yeah.
You want to make the game that makes people forget Gears of War and things like that, and you'll have this big, grand, maybe a grand space odyssey in mind, and it's got a storyline that Peter Jackson would be envious of and whatnot, and you're going to have Hollywood calling you for the film rights after the first 2 days of release. But you got to understand that idea is going to change throughout this iterative process. Other people who don't share the same idea as you of what is cool and what is not are going to have their say. Your programmers are going to have their say, and things that you just thought were so important just may not work.
I was just going to say, I'll have you give us a beautiful demonstration of iteration. Take Halo, for instance.
Yeah.
How did Halo start off, Zach?
Halo started off with Bungie back in the day on the Macintosh, and from what I remember, because I actually had this on pre-order for my Mac a long time ago. Yeah, it was going to be a third-person shooter a la Tribes, if you guys remember Tribes. And it got kind of soaked up by Microsoft, and it changed from there, and it was going to be, at first it was going to be on the Mac only, then Microsoft picked it up, and it was going to finally be coming to the PC, but it was still this Tribes kind of game, because they used to have all these screenshots, if you think back, In fact, they even had a video done in OpenGL that they presented. I think it was at E3, and the guy's all, he's all proud of it and showing it on a big projector behind him, where you see a Master Chief in the third person run into a little Covenant outpost, and he shoots at a couple of guys who, the little grunt guys. We just didn't know that at the time. They all charge after him, and then like 3 Master Chiefs all get into a Warthog, and they drive away, and it's sliding on the road, and everybody got so excited by this. And then finally, when it eventually got to the Xbox, years later, and I had forgotten it and been reminded of it 7 times since then. It finally came out, and Xbox launch title, and I saw it for the first time. Halo, finally! And we're right behind the gun.
Yep.
And I was crestfallen. I was just like, but I'm done with these games. I'm tired of sitting right behind an AK-47 or a plasma rifle or whatever. It's just been so done to death. Why did they do that to such a good idea? But that's how the iterative process works. They eventually found out that kind of gameplay wasn't going to work out well for the Xbox because they wanted to move the whole thing over, excuse me, from the PC to their new big bad console because they thought it would sell. But that third-person kind of battlefield gameplay didn't lend itself well to a console game, and they didn't have the network playability perfected yet. So they had to make it single-player, and it turned into a first-person shooter. And that's a really good example of how this kind of thing works. Another thing about that, though, in excuse me, how your game is going to change from the beginning until how it ends is time. Time is going to change a lot of that too, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So next. Get your game spec, or get a game spec quickly and rapid prototype. Sit down with your programmers, or if you are the programmer, and come up with something you can use to test out the idea as quickly as you can. That way you're going to learn very quickly what works, what doesn't, what could be added, what needs to be taken away, and how the game itself can be developed, how the story can be developed. We knew when we were working on this that this was going to be a text-based adventure game. That was the only real thing we knew. But we had to sit down and actually come up with a proof of concept so that we knew how it was going to be actually formed and how it would play through. And that's where we get into the multicolored room that I think you guys have already gone through at this point.
Right.
All right, so down from here, programmers and designers must communicate. You have to understand that the two of you speak very different languages, that in general the designer is concerned with what the player will experience and whether or not it will excite them or make them sad or make them happy or whether or not it will be fun. The programmer, on the other hand, wants to make sure that the game works. They want to make sure that these letters and alphanumeric characters are going to result in the game itself. But you've got to be able to say, can we do this feature? No, we can't. And, you've got to understand the input coming from the programmer. The programmer's got to understand it coming from the designer. And you're going to have to make efforts on both fields to understand where each other are coming from. So just be ready for that. Next, solidify your story as much as possible. There is no such thing as too much backstory. And, when I was working on Hyperion, I had this big, involved backstory taken into account. I'll talk more about exactly what I had in mind later, but I don't think you can push your backstory too far. I don't care if you write a 90-page novel that outlines what your game is about. Just know going in that there's, chances are, no way in the world that 90-page novel is making it into the game.
Right.
But the more information you have about your world, about your characters, about the environment, the easier it's going to be to make gameplay decisions, to make level design decisions, to what are things going to look like, how are things going to respond and react, what should the player see, how should information be presented. The more information you have flushed out ahead of time, the easier that's going to be. Like, just as a quick example from the world of Hyperion, I wanted there to be a heavy emphasis on, like, corporate governments. That this is a world in which corporations have pretty much taken over the idea of any government because they're the ones who can afford to do this after so many wars have taken place and whatnot. And so, as you pass through Hyperion, we have these, this huge complex for this company, and everything is all about the company. And at one point, one guy is getting in trouble with the company, and one of his superiors is writing up some sort of a legal document that allows him to tap all of his communication. And all he's got to do is pay a certain tax fee, and he can now do this. So it's like now even the laws are starting to wrap around what the corporations need to do. So and I was able to come up with that idea because I wanted that to be a very important thing, as something that I'd backstory. So along with that, though, comes the next thing, which is realize that the player may not be able to get all of the story in one little game, and you're going to have to focus the experience down. like I said, a 90-page novel won't make it into any game, but you've got to figure out what the key elements are, what they've got to see in order to see the world the way they need to experience it. And then finally, be flexible. The playing field is going to change, and you must change with it. Your programmers are going to come to you and say, look, I know we had spec'd this out, but this is not working, or I know you wanted this feature, but it won't come in, or, we'd already given you this list of features, but here's a couple of more that we really feel we need to work in as well, just to make other things play more smoothly. We need you to come up with some way to work these in. So be ready to roll with the punches like that. And let's see, moving on from here, we actually get into the creation of Hyperion itself. Now, these are just some things that I had to deal with when I first started creating Hyperion. The first thing is, all I really knew about the game when it was presented to me was that it was a text-based adventure game. Everything else was really completely up in the air, and it was all up to me at that point. So what I had to do, for starters, is get the story and all of my influences fleshed out and solidified. Now, I'm a big William Gibson fan. I've read Neuromancer. I'm one of the, I think, 6 people on the planet who liked the movie Johnny Mnemonic. And there's 6 of us, and we're proud of it. But, I mean, I like that cyberpunk, gritty, the world is run by corporations, and everything is kind of, marble and glass and stainless steel and electro-minimalist. But, out there in the streets, there's this kind of gritty and dirty, cyber-technical, group of people who are just trying to get by. That's always been something I've been a huge fan of. I played a lot of the tabletop role-playing game Shadowrun, and that was always a big thing. In fact, I was actually tempted when I first got the idea to actually try to make a Shadowrun-style game, but I didn't want to rip directly from somebody else, so it kind of got throttled back just a little bit. But I had to get all of that ironed out and get that story really locked down before I could do anything as far as where to go from here, because really, if you strip away the story, Hyperion is just a few blocks with some directions, and you're going to pick stuff up and put it down.
Right.
But now, when you add a story to that, suddenly you get descriptions, which will turn those blocks into thriving environments. You get various text that pop up when you pick up an item, which turn those from just a little tiny piece of code into something that you truly interact with and actually help push the story forward, make you learn things about what's going on and what happened inside of this facility. So all of those things had to be ironed out before we could go any further. Once the story was more or less in place, or as in place as it could get within the time constraints, we had a very long discussion over what we could and could not do, can and cannot do, and why we could or couldn't do them. I had a lot of things I wanted to do. I mean, I've played several text-based games, and I had in my head this vision of, something that had 25 commands, and you could pick this up, and you could use that, and you could look at this thing, and you could scan this with your little PDA scanner.
Not forget how you wanted to be able to hack computers.
I wanted to hack computers. I wanted
directory listing.
Yeah. I realized that we couldn't do the Johnny Mnemonic style, matrix interface where everything's virtual reality like the Lawnmower Man or anything like that. So what we had to do, I was thinking, what if you could use a computer and then the text-based nature of the game temporarily disappears, and all you get is a C prompt. And now you have things like, directory listing, and now you can get to the root level access, and you can hack into this and turn on security cameras or unlock doors and things like that. So all of these huge ideas. And, we had to talk about why we could and couldn't put those in. Another one was if you could carry a gun that had a certain number of ammunition, and there were NPCs and things that you could shoot at.
Right.
And, it was like, type in, shoot bad guy. But we really quickly discovered that was just going to blow things all out of proportion.
It just gets outside of the scope of a simple Hello World application.
And that was something that we actually suffered with through the beginning of the project was, keeping it interesting, but remembering this is a very simple game, because beyond it being a text-based adventure, in our case, not necessarily in yours because you're a student and you're learning this, in our case, this had to be created in a format that would allow for easy presentation for someone just learning how to program, which meant the game itself had to be simple. So that was a big constraint that we were under. You, not so much. You get to benefit from us keeping it simple and the way it was presented so that you can expand upon it and make it absolutely as big as you want to. So I fully expect to see NPCs and things that you can shoot at from each and every single one of you. No, I'm just kidding. Sort of.
Maybe.
All right, maybe. So, all right. So, once we get that, we look over the story, figure out which parts are most vital, and what the player needs to know and when they need to know it. This is where PDAs and notes came in, and really that's what I was limited to. If eventually, and I'll talk about how things change when we get into some of the early problems of the game. I was thinking that the story could develop through the use of computers, hacking into people's emails, watching video camera feeds, which is something I was just barely able to work in a little bit. But using those elements to pace out how the player comes to grips with what's happened throughout the story. Then finally, once you got all that ironed out, it's time to lay out the world, and I just added as an afterthought, be ready to destroy it. No matter what kind of level you're designing, realize that it may not work, and the more experience you have, of course, the more apt you're going to be to create a level that will work or will just need some changing. But it's possible, especially when you first get started, that you're going to create something that just doesn't have the feel you're looking for, or some important spec of the game may change and require you to completely overhaul everything you've done, which is what happened to us. So again, don't get so attached to something that you're going to get bent out of shape if you have to kill it. Stay realistic as possible. I wanted this game to feel like you were actually walking around in a facility, so I started coming up with names and descriptions of locations that would kind of make sense. I didn't want people to walk into this thing and they're in a gigantic, spooky warehouse with cobwebs and lasers across the ceiling. Yeah, I needed things that, it's like I just walked into a big corporate facility. What am I going to be met with when I first walk in? Well, a big, impressive area. I need a receptionist. It would be cool if they're trying to wow people. Wouldn't it be cool if they had like a little bar or something just off the side where it's like, your meeting is at 10, you're here at 9:30. Well, I'm going to go over to the lounge and have a muffin or something, that so they can entertain people. And then from there, maybe you move on to a security station. That's where name badges are scanned, and you kind of clock in with security, that sort of thing. Or if you're a visitor, that's where you get processed and you get your visitor's badge and so on and so forth. So come up with that sort of thing. Try to imagine yourself there and the kind of things that you're likely to see. Take a lot of notes and reference that source material that you wrote up. Reference your inspirations. Like go back, maybe a book that you read that really inspired you, or a movie that you watched really gave you a really good idea. Go back and watch it again and think, well, when they landed on LV-429, they saw this really cool corridor, and it'd be nice if I had something like that. So, it's how you want to present it, but make sure you stay as close as you can. The goals of the game had to be established as well at this point, and these are kind of simplified, what I have written down here, from kind of what we had in mind at the beginning, but basically, it was that the player needed to discover the story progressively, kind of like reading an interactive novel, and they needed to more or less collect information, access new areas, and get out alive. That's the whole idea of the game. And then the next thing was that time is your enemy, and you should know your enemy. And what I mean by that is that, we knew going in that we had a very, very limited time scale to get this game out. And so every decision that was made as far as game production was based on that time scale. And you should be the same way. I would recommend against hobbying out a game where you're like, oh, I've been writing this game in my spare time and that sort of thing. If you're watching this class, I'm going to assume you're fairly serious about game design, so don't let yourself fall into that. Even if it is for a hobby, even if it's not something that you want to do as a career and you're just doing it because it's fun, take the time to get an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and write a deadline on it in a big fat black magic marker and pin it up right over your computer and know that you have to have the game done by that point. Or if that's if you need something a little more precise, break it down. You need to have the story and everything outlined by this date. You need to have the base code laid down by this date, and so on and so forth. Give yourself rigid deadlines. Don't force somebody else to put you in that position, because if you are planning on taking this to a career at some point, time is going to be the biggest factor you have. Time controls whether or not you have a job from one day to the next. You've got to actually be ready to deliver on time with consistency. So always try to make that a key factor. Now, let's see. Moving on from here. Where are we? Okay, yeah, I see. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, where I talk about the creation of the world. Now, how did we actually begin creating the Hyperion world? At this point, I knew what the story was going to be about. I already had a really good idea. And by the way, as I progress, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't... Now, I haven't spoiled anything much yet.
Right.
But we're about to. So I'm just a warning.
We're about to spoil most everything.
Yeah. So, I started off by drawing a map. And I had to tie the story's progression into the map. And this is where, how the story was presented became really important. Because my original idea was that I wanted you to be kind of a industrial espionage expert, corporate spy, that sort of thing, which is very much Shadowrun if you guys haven't played much of it. And by the way, if at this point of time the Shadowrun game for Xbox 360 is out, disregard that entirely. That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, and is actually a pretty sore spot, so let's not talk about that. Anyways, so I wanted you to go in and like maybe find some sort of important, valuable information and steal it from a company. But it just seemed like kind of passé. It seemed like that had been done, especially like in the world of Shadowrun. It's just been kind of worn out, and I don't want people to feel like I was more or less making Shadowrun the text-based adventure. So I pulled away from that idea. And another thing that kind of, I think, inspired the game Shadowrun and is real big into the cyberpunk thing is Blade Runner. And Blade Runner, despite all of the great performances by Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer, is just a detective story. It's a really weird one, but that's all it is. So I was thinking, what if you're a detective and something terrible has gone down inside this facility, and you're going to slowly come across what it is. You've been paid to go in here and figure out what it is, but it's not going to be all apparent as soon as you walk in. You got to watch a couple of episodes of CSI. First off, we start off with a simple crime scene and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where the whole thing began. And when I first drew out the map, I started with the main entrance hall. I started drawing it out in the order in which the player would experience it. And I was thinking to myself, all right, if I'm playing, one, what would make sense for me to see from here to the next point? And two, what do I need them to be able to see? I mean, if I was just thinking about this in the terms of, let's forget about the game for a minute. I'm just laying out an actual facility. And I'm walking through it as I go. I get into the main entrance hall. I can see this lounge over here. I can see the security station. Oh, look, right behind that is where I would have my interviews if I was trying to get a job there. So let's put a human resources department there. And once you get past security, this is where the whole place opens up. And we have these huge places where, if you take tours and they have all sorts of information handy for people who are just visiting. And it goes off to all of the different departments where people work. So, and that's kind of the steps that I took. And I would just take one of those branches and kind of walk through it, more or less, going room by room, saying, all right, what should I see here? What would make the most sense? And in some cases, based on what I have to work with, what do I need to cram in here? Sometimes it wasn't all perfect flow. Suspension of disbelief next thing was respect your limitations, but hide them as best you can. Your text-based adventure, you won't be able to do everything. It's not going to be like, turn back handspring into next room and ninja kick the robot with a gun.
Bottom line is, you're not going to be able to do much.
That's right. And actually, we ended up doing a lot less than we'd originally spec'd out. But you've got to find a way to present the game where those limitations aren't apparent. That's why, when you play a game where, maybe using, I guess it would be like the old Quake engine from back in the day when you could still fall through the floor if you were in the wrong spot, or if you walked off the edge of the map, you could just kind of fall out into nowhere. And so they would hide that by putting walls that you just could not pass, or mountains that you just couldn't climb, and they still do that to this day to keep your gaming experience focused. And it's not like they're trying to make that a big thing. It's not like there's a big red sign that says you cannot go here, unless, of course, you're playing Oblivion.
True.
But, beyond that, though, suspension of disbelief is going to be important. So I threw this in because it should be a given, but a lot of people, especially, I don't want to use the term newbies, but people who are just trying to get into getting their ideas out, they try to work stuff in, like, there's a Easter egg that's really painfully obvious that kind of breaks away from the game and that sort of thing, or, hi mom on the wall, or things like that. That's totally cool. I totally understand, working in jokes and whatnot, but try not to make those detract from the gaming experience. You don't want somebody to be playing your game and go, oh, look, there's where a programmer wrote a note to their friend. So, keep that suspension of disbelief. Try to treat this as seriously as you would treat a feature film. Next, you want to make the environment as rich as you can make it, but within reason. Remember that you can only show so much text on the screen. Remember, you only have that limited window size. And B, you cannot make people read very much. You may have this big, long description of this room with all these robots in it, and how the robots are being assembled, and how all these parts are being bolted on, but you get into what I very politely and with all respect call J.R.R. Tolkien syndrome, where you just get so descriptive that it's almost hard to flow, even though you do have a great product in front of you. You don't want people to get so bogged down in the descriptions that they lose track of what's going on, which is probably what I'm doing with this presentation, so I should move on. That was supposed to be funny. I didn't hear a single person laugh. Oh, God. If you got to work for it like that, it's just not worth it. So this was the original map that was spec'd out for Hyperion. Very, very small. Excuse me, very simple. We started off with the main entrance hall and the lounge and the visitor security area. Actually, excuse me just a second. Sorry, all this talking's kind of drying me out just a little bit. Now, the first 3 rooms that you run across are actually part of an original proof of concept spec that you guys never saw. It was before we even did the red, green, blue room and all that kind of stuff with the balls and whatnot. It was just a simple, can we make it happen? And I already had a general idea for my story in mind, so I went ahead and incorporated it. And it turned out I liked it so much that I put it into this first iteration of the game. I had just got this all drawn out and was just starting to get satisfied with... excuse me, I can't talk anymore.
Okay, Zach's dying at the moment. He'll hopefully join us back in just a second.
I really am sorry about that. But anyways, moving on. So I had just started to get the rooms actually written out, and I realized that there were going to be some major changes. It was right at that point that we had another meeting where we talked about the next iteration of the game before I even had the first playable version completed, and we'd already run into some very early problems. The first, and probably one of the key ones, was there was just too much to do. And by that, I don't mean that the rooms were too many or there was too much stuff in the rooms. I mean our command list was too long.
We did have a big one at first.
Yeah, we had use, scan, take, look at, use. I think I said use twice, but we had all of these different things that we could do, and it turned out that we were just overblowing the project and making it too hard on ourselves, and in the end making it too hard on the people who were here to learn. And in our case, the gaming experience was only part of it. The other half was making something that people could learn from by the experience of actually writing it. So we had to throttle back, and that was our solution, was reconsider the command specs and then scale back a bit. 2, the game was too linear. Despite the layout that I had come up with and how you should be going in and kind of stealing some information and walking out, it was more or less go into this room, find this key, which will unlock the next door you have to proceed to, and so on and so forth.
And you could actually see that on your map with the way the original map,
yeah,
the way it snaked around from one room to the next.
The whole idea was you come in here, you got to grab something out of here, probably a key or a cell phone or something, and then you make it into here, maybe go into the telecom office, and then it was get this half of the map done over here on the right-hand side, then get the left side done, and when you make it to the vault...
And look how the left side works. Start over there in main lobby, so through... back up to the main lobby. Boom. Right now, go left.
Bink.
So bing, left
Bink.
Again, up,
and
right,
it's just
up,
a straight
and
line.
Yeah.
And then you're completely finished. So very, very linear game, but because the game was so small, that's kind of one of the only choices I had. At the same time, there was kind of a catch with trying to combat the linearity of it, and that is that you're more or less fighting against problem 1. To make it less linear, you have to, by definition, make it a little more complex. And it already was complex. So it's kind of, which of these is more important? So we had to watch out for that. But we did end up allowing for areas of the map to be explored in a different order than previously anticipated. And that kind of helped. Like, you don't necessarily have to go from the main hallway to the right. Mm-hmm. Have a couple of things unlocked where even if they don't pertain to the story, even if they don't help you advance, you can at least go there and, see some things that have happened. Then the next thing was that it just wasn't interesting enough yet. The story that I had was cool, but the implementation of it was just not all that great. It just seemed a little too predictable and too straightforward, and there wasn't enough reason to keep you wanting to play. So our solution actually came by accident. We were all kind of sitting down bouncing ideas off one another, and it occurred to us that we could have a doorway that was kind of one way. And it was like you could go east, but once you got into the eastern room, you could not go back west. And I realized that, or we all kind of realized, that through the use of description, you could turn that into a teleportation system, where you teleport to an entirely different location, but there's no portal when you get there. It's just like zap, and you're here. Hi. So teleportation became one of the key factors of the game's plot, and that helped us change the story and make it more interesting, so that the whole idea of artificial intelligence and robots being a little more realistic could be used kind of as a very simplistic ruse for the player to discover, oh, look, they're making intelligent robots. I'll bet that's where all the hassle came down. But only later on as you progress, you find out, no, it was they were secretly working on teleportation, and they were using the whole idea of robot AI as a cover to keep people away from it. And then, on top of that, we were going to work with the idea. I thought this would be cool. You're no longer here to steal stuff. I decided you were a detective. But what if somebody else was here to steal stuff, and the job went bad? So now we would slowly discover that it was an inside job, and that one of the people who worked there decided that the information was valuable, killed everybody in his office, and tried to make out with, probably the biggest scientific find of humanity. So, again, it was just kind of an accident, but it worked out in our favor. And then finally, the problem we had was that the game was too easy, and this was a side effect of the linearity. It kind of worked out like reading one of those choose-your-own-adventure books. It was like, go left, then go right, and then eventually you're just going to make it right to the end. And the solution was to keep the time constraints in mind, but come up with a couple of good puzzles. And it was at that point we added the weight system, where you just couldn't carry everything in the game. You had to suddenly start being selective, and in that we had to start coming up with, what's something you have to have on you?
Right.
Because that's going to make things more dynamic. I have to pick this up. I don't necessarily need this, but I'm going to need to pick this up later, so I'm going to need to drop that, and so on and so forth. Because that just made the game a little more difficult. At the same time, my immediate response was, I'll just cover my game in puzzles. You'll have to pick this object up and put it over here. You'll have to, do this, that, and the other. And there just wasn't time to set all the puzzles up and get all those designed. Because when you're designing a game that is based around puzzles, puzzle design is actually just as important, if not significantly more so, than actual level design. And the key is making the two kind of work together well. A really good example of an early on puzzle system that just got used and abused and dragged straight into the ground and just beaten the crap out of by Eidos was Tomb Raider's block dragging. Because you'd have to grab Lara and she'd have to drag, and it was so comical at the time because the block of solid stone that is it's like 6 feet taller than she is, and it's just as wide as is tall, so it's solid rock and probably weighs about 80 tons or something. But she would just grab it with those two little stick arms, and she'd have to drag it over a switch, which would unlock this thing where we'd have to go up and get another block and put on another switch. And it was cool because they had found a way to incorporate a puzzle into a level. And then they used that with so many other Eidos games, and other people started picking up on it. The Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver series abused it, and so on and so forth. But, just kind of a good example. So there's all of the early problems we had, and that's actually where the game spec changed. This is where, when I say that...
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. When we ended up throttling back on our command specs, this is where Logan and Buzz came to me and said, all right, that's it. You can move, you can pick stuff up, and you can put stuff down. That's all you can do. And so it became my job as the designer to go, okay, we're to the point now where I can no longer request any more features, and I have to take what I've been given and turn it into something believable. And that's where we came up with the idea that when you just pick up a PDA, or when you pick up a note, or anything that's been left behind for some source of information, it just immediately gives you a pickup message that will tell you what was on it. So, it was a way to simplify. It wasn't like you have to pick up camcorder, use camcorder, and see what was on it. It was as soon as you pick it up, your character knows what it is, he knows it's a PDA, knows to press the enter button and read the last message on it, and you're all set to go. So that was just something we had to incorporate. And then, of course, you had to be able to drop things because the weight system was going to eventually become a factor.
And with that being the final, here's what you can do, you use that to come up with, I believe, one good puzzle.
Yeah.
In the entire game.
I had only one good puzzle in the entire game, and it was so hard that it seemed like a lot of people complained about it in the first bit. They just couldn't figure it out.
Oh, the information was there. You just had to read between the lines.
You did, and the puzzle was that we have a PDA. It's the only bit of information that tells you how this works, where our head of security is telling somebody, he's trying to explain to him. He's like, look, I know you don't like this, but I have to buzz you in to the cold storage room from the main security room. And he doesn't say it really in those words, because it's kind of like one of those, inner work emails where they already know what you're talking about. So it's not like he's trying to explain the intricacies of the system. They already know how the system works. He's just trying to explain, this is the way it has to be, guys.
Right.
The boss is getting a little, freaky about security, so I've got to buzz you in from here. From that, the player had to read between the lines and figure out that the security card that opened up that room had to stay in the security office the whole time for the door to be unlocked.
Right.
So you had to realize you got to pick up, it was passkey 4, pick it up, go lay it down in the security room, and then you could walk into cold storage like no problem. So that was the one good puzzle I was able to squeak in because of that. At the same time, with teleportation becoming a key factor, I had to redesign a level that took that teleportation into effect, and that is where we came up with our new and final level layout for Hyperion, which is what you see here. Now, how did I actually draw this out? Really, it is just a really mangled series of squares that I drew on a lousy sheet of notebook paper that I recreated in something clean and readable. But I started right here in the Hyperion Chamber, which wasn't even called that at first. I didn't have a name for the game at this stage, really. That was called the Teleportation Room. And I knew that if we can teleport just by going to an adjacent room, then if we're only teleporting from a single location, then we only have 3 possible places we can teleport. It's not 4. You have to have one source of entry. So that leaves only 3 doors remaining. Doors, I'm using the term very loosely, so that we could teleport into other areas. So I was like, well, where are they going to teleport to? We could make it simple, like, The Fly. They have like a sending chamber and a receiving chamber.
Sure.
But I was like, that's been done. So let's maybe send them to another planet. That's kind of out there and kind of weird. And they'll have to figure out, what's happening on this planet and turn that into another part of the story. So I came up with very simple terms: the lava planet, the ice planet, and the jungle planet, which through the PDA system you do end up with names for these planets, and you kind of figure out vaguely where they are in the cosmos and all that sort of thing. So you do discover, only if you do a little bit of research, that they are indeed on other planets, and you're not being, teleported to some island in Tahiti where a lava, is flowing or something. So I wanted to make sure, though, that the lava planets and the ice planets and whatnot did not get too descriptive. I didn't want it to turn into a big deal, because I was trying to imagine, what if I got zapped to another planet? I'm not going to sit there and play, Jacques Cousteau and try to really analyze the environment. I'm going to be a little bit freaked out. I'm going to be taking a look at my immediate surroundings and trying to find a way home. And so that's really all I wanted the player to focus on. That's why when you get into the kind of off-world areas, they're very simple. Really, all you get is a description, and every now and then there's a couple of very simple explanations. Maybe there are some people here, there's some equipment lying here, and here's something you got to pick up, by the way, which we really only worked in because it countered the weight system, and it made the game just a little more difficult.
Right.
The only exception to this rule was the jungle planet, where I had originally intended a huge plot development, and that changed because, as I mentioned earlier, time was a big factor. Really, this whole game, the story behind it was generated in about 10 hours, and that includes all map drawings and all descriptions and all items, everything written out. Was only
game rules, etc.
Yeah, everything was all outlined in about 10 hours overnight. So it was getting to be about 4, 5, 6 in the morning. I don't remember. It was getting very, very, very late at night, and I actually had 2 more rows of rooms up here. An entire 12 more rooms added to the whole game that expanded upon the jungle planet, and then turned the ending core area, like the central part of the complex, into a whole nother thing where a lot more plot was going to be developed. And I had to simplify that down because I was literally falling asleep and I was out of time. I just didn't have time to progress it any further than I already had. But what I started with, I had the Hyperion Chamber. I branched out with my 3 planets, so I knew where we were going to teleport to. And then I kind of, I guess, how would you put this, kind of retroactively fitted the original complex I had designed into the spaces that were left. Now, I didn't start off by drawing a 6x7 grid. I just started off drawing a bunch of boxes and realized I would later on fit a grid around that. I didn't walk in thinking that I had to use all the boxes, because you can do that. You can just have a box that has no entry point, and so that just takes up some sort of space so that you can have an oddly shaped room. But as fate would have it, I just didn't have any extra rooms when I got done. And so what you end up seeing down here is something very similar to what was on that original 4x4 layout, but now, I guess you could say, kind of retrofitted to our new design.
Right, stretched out.
And the color coding system that I'm showing here is just to kind of give you an idea of what I had in mind for the flow, and that was all of the gray rooms are sort of, they're mundane rooms where, maybe something can happen. I'm sure you'll pick up a PDA that is important, you'll learn something valuable, and so on and so forth. But they're not super ultra mega key areas. The yellow areas are key areas. I mean, we have this top secret storage area where you pick up your first crystal. We have, the clean room, which I've only got that labeled as something important because if you really get into how the crystal chamber works, this is where you have to keep taking off your environment suit or whatever it is while you swap items out. So, and then you have the crystal chamber, and where you've got to figure out to just place 1 crystal at a time instead of 2 or 3. We'd originally wanted to do 2 or 3.
Yeah, I know.
It just, again, that iterative process just dictated that would be too much of a pain. Keep it simple, 1 crystal at a time, but then use your level designing skills and use your creativity
to work around that.
Work that into the story, where people are saying, like if you use 2 crystals at a time, you could have an overload. And another thing, too, about that that process, you'll notice the crystal chamber is kind of tucked over here out of the way, literally right in the middle of the lava planet, but, nobody realizes that unless they draw the map out like this. I had no place to put this room. I was originally going to put it here in the equipment room, and I was like, no, that's too easy. So I stuck it over here, and I couldn't figure out where else to put it, so I wrote the story around it having to be so far away, where there's one PDA where somebody says, if it were any closer to the teleportation reaction, we'd have a real problem on our hands. Just to kind of give you the idea that, so it's moved away for a reason. And all that sort of thing. In fact, that's also why there's another PDA where somebody's kind of, laughing and saying something along the lines of, everybody thinks I'm taking data into the server room. They don't realize that I'm carrying crystals into the crystal chamber. So, it's underlying stuff that maybe not everybody's going to pick up on, and you've got to be okay with that. But I would rather have a lot of subtleties in my game that not everybody gets than everything being straightforward and right up in your face and blunt and obvious. So that's about it for the game design. Just a really quick spoiler, since I'm going to assume some of you guys have already played through the game and know how it ends and know what we came up with. The original idea for the jungle planet was you would get there and find out that not only was there another indigenous life form on it, but that the company was turning them into slaves. And it was just too much to expand upon. So I ended up getting stuck with just 2 little jungle planet rooms. I said, heck with it. Let's say the humans got there and they're making the aliens sick. So it's like War of the Worlds in reverse. Mm-hmm. And I took the central core, and Dr. Saren is in there. And I had a lot of story left that I had to get across. And I only had 3 rooms left to do it. So, and the last room doesn't count because when you walk into that room, the game's over. So I really only had 2 rooms left. And so that's why Dr. Saren is carrying a notebook that kind of spills out the game's ending. And the cool thing about doing that, though, is that, in the beginning of the game, Dr. Saren is made out to be a bad guy. He's kind of the jerk that no one likes, and he gets on to everybody. And our likable Dr. Tom, whatever his last name was, because I can't think of it right now off the top of my head, he was cool with everybody. He was always nice to folks, even if they kind of messed up. Like the head of security was told he had to watch everything that Tom did at the facility because Dr. Saren started spying on him. But Tom responds in an email, it's okay. You do what you got to do. I don't want to get you in trouble. So he's this really likable character. But it turns out he's the guy that actually bought these thugs that come in and kill everybody so he could steal everything. But this is presented to you from Dr. Saren's notes. So you end the game going, all right, well, is that really what happened, or is that just Saren's side of the story to cover his tracks? It's kind of a Lady and the Tiger thing, and you can decide whether or not which one you think was honest and which one you think is the ending. But anyway, so that was pretty much the whole layout for the game, and there we go.
And there was multiple winnings.
There was, but that becomes a new thing actually after we analyzed this whole layout.
Oh yeah, good point.
So we had some new problems arise from this new design, and the first one was grammatical errors and late night laziness, and this happened from me just not really having the time to get up and walk away like I told you guys you should be doing. Again, I had 10 hours to churn out a game, so I really was chained to the desk in this case, and that came at a price. And I actually suffered because of that, because there were areas where my grammar was terrible, my spelling was awful, or I had just done copy and pastes, and I'd either copied and pasted incorrectly, or I had done it so obviously that it hurt, where things had the exact same description minus 1 or 2 words, or minus 1, like the wrong word. So I had to go in there and do a lot of cleaning up and had to get some people to proofread. I recommend you get somebody else to proofread if at all possible. Me, personally, I hate proofreading my own stuff because I just don't see it. I always assume that what I wrote was what I intended to write, and I don't even read it. That's the funny thing. It's like Buzz gets onto me all the time. I'll be reading something aloud that I have written, and I'm inserting words while I read it because I'm just trying to speak it the way I would actually speak it without writing it down. So get somebody else to help you out. 2, we needed ways to die in order to make the game interesting because really, originally there weren't any ways to die. So it was like, well, let's work in this thing with the environment suit. What if the environment suit, you don't have it on, you go into a planet, you die? Well, I have one where you freeze to death, one where you burn to death, and I couldn't come up with anything for the jungle planet. So I was like, well, what if the whole atmosphere was based on something kind of like nitrous oxide, and you just laugh yourself to death? Because really, I was borderlining hysterical anyway when I was writing it, so I thought it'd be kind of funny. But there was even problems with that. After we got that initiated, we realized that you could still go into a planet like the lava world, kick off your suit, and then walk around for a while. Well, that's not realistic. I mean, that kind of breaks that suspension of disbelief. So we had to take that and go in and add another system where the game kind of checks with every action. Are they in a place where they should die if they take off the environment suit? And did they take off the environment suit?
For those of you that followed through with all of the coding, that's what we were talking about when we said that Zach came to us and asked if we could determine if we were off-world, and that's when we added the off-world property.
That's right, and the funny thing was, this was already well beyond the point where I should be requesting features, but I realized that we genuinely had a problem, so it wasn't as much of a feature request as it was a bug fix.
True.
We literally had a problem we had to solve, and so I had to go back to the programmers and say, this is going to sound like a feature, but we need to handle this in some way.
But having the off-world property was so much easier than having an if statement check room after room after room after room after room after room to make sure you have the environment suit on. It's just easier to say, all right, is the environment suit off and are they off-world? If so, they're dead.
If so, kill them. There you go. And then we also added the turn-based death system. And that came at the far side of some testing that I'll talk about here in just a moment. But we needed, a nice round number where if you'd been dawdling and maybe you got lost or whatever, well, let's work it into the story where there's a cleanup crew and the corporation actually has hired soldiers who go in and wipe out any witnesses and make sure that people like you don't get in and learn any trade secrets or anything. Right. So they're there actually to kill you. So we came up with some like one death for that. If you go over, I believe it's 150 steps, 150 moves, you're toast. These guys come in and they mow you down. And then we realized there was a problem with that. What if you're off-world? Because these guys aren't going to chase you through a bloody teleporter just to kill you. So we had to come up with another death for that. Well, let's just say they turn the teleporter off and now you're stranded on this world. That means I've got to write a death that's so generic it'll work for any one of the three worlds.
Yeah.
So, we ended up having to kind of work around that.
Right.
And then finally we had, there's another, the grenade.
Yep.
Because I had, without even thinking about it, written a description for the fusion grenade where people would be afraid to shoot at you.
Right.
And but without even thinking about that, I wrote the ending where the soldiers just mowed you down.
And that's great, because when Terry tested the game for us and he got all the way to that point, he was so mad because he's like, wait a minute, I was holding this fusion grenade that should be able to take out the entire place, and they mowed me down. They didn't care.
Exactly, and this is, again, where you need other input
so
that people can help you with that sort of thing. It's also where testing comes in handy, and I'll talk about testing here in just a moment, because really, any testing done at this point was kind of in the alpha stage.
Right.
It really only took place between the designers and the programmers, and that was it. But anyways, we had a special death for if you're carrying the grenade, and I thought it'd be lame if you could bargain your way out with the grenade or something. So in the end, if anybody's seen all the endings for the game yet, I did not want any happy endings for this game. I like the idea of everything being kind of gritty and kind of sour. So I was like, heck with it. You're going to die. Let's throw the grenade. But, you just got it out of a theoretical weapons lab.
Right.
So, and also, why would they have a fusion grenade in their office, even if it's a test lab that could potentially nuke the entire facility? They wouldn't. So you throw it and it doesn't work, and then you get a really violent death after that, because I thought that was funny. And so that took care of all of our endings, and then we needed more than one ending. That took care of all our deaths. Then we actually needed endings, because in the end I just had, and you get away and happily ever after, and we needed some sort of variety. But to do that, we needed some sort of situation or some sort of factors to be accounted for by which other endings could occur. That's the key. And so we came up with a couple of things, some simple tests where, did you actually pick up the fusion grenade and did you carry it all the way through? Because that's the funny thing. If right before you go to the jungle planet, if you don't have the fusion grenade with you, that's it. You're not going to be able to blow up the facility because you don't have an explosive on you. And the other one was a lot of people, there's a rock on the second part of the jungle world, and if you're carrying the suit, chances are you won't be able to pick up the rock. Or I don't know if that was actually going to work out as well as I hoped. It originally intended the fusion grenade to weigh like 2 pounds. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it ended up weighing in the end. But the idea was you could only carry the fusion grenade and the suit. So there's a rock on the last part of the jungle world, and if you want to pick up the rock, you got to put down the fusion grenade. So you have this one last chance to ditch the grenade. But you had to have the grenade in the hydrogen processing room, because that's going to nuke the whole facility. And then you could, your choice, pick up the data module that had all of the specs for the Hyperion Project and escape with it. And then based on those two factors alone, positive and negative for each one, you have 4 possible endings. And so I had to write up a separate ending for each one. And none of them are really all that happy. Because, either you blow up the facility and you get away with the data, in which case you're going to sell this data that a lot of people have died for. Now, as far as I'm concerned, you're a bad person, but you're a rich bad person. And
right.
maybe that's worth it, because that's going to be worth a whole lot of money as long as you can find a way to sell it and survive. Or you sold the stuff, you actually walk away with the data, but you didn't blow the place up either because you forgot to put the grenade in the room or you didn't have it with you in the first place. And I was thinking, That's all well and good, but if they were sending a cleanup crew to this place, then they're watching this facility like a hawk. They're going to see that shuttle launch, and they're going to bring it down, naturally. So they escort you to the ground, and then they take you off to prison, and you're probably going to get killed. So that was kind of a bad ending. There was the altruistic, pseudo-heroic ending where you blow the place up because nobody can learn of this stuff, and you leave the data behind. And that's where you kind of agree that Dr. Saren was right. The world's not ready for all this stuff. And so you nuke the whole place. But, I was thinking about that, too. You can't really let that be a happy ending either. Because, you got hired for this job. There's going to be a paper trail that leads to you. It's not like you can just go back to your office and continue on with your life. The company's going to come after you now. So now you have to go into hiding. And then the last one was you just run and you don't blow anything up and you don't take the data. And that was what I was calling the chicken ending, so the kind of worthless, not really, no courage ending. So that was, you run and you spend the rest of your life in hiding because you're a coward. So, and those were all the endings I came up with, and that solved that problem. Once we got done with all that, though, it was time for the very last stage in our particular number of iterations, and that was to do some final cleanup. And this is where a lot of play testing occurred. This is where Terry went all the way through the game, and I went all the way through the game. This is the point where I had to actually do a couple of speed runs to figure out what's the absolute minimum number of moves you can beat the game in. And I think we worked it out to like 105 or something, because I did make a couple of little goof-ups while I was typing stuff in. We came up with some debug commands, which you guys have probably already seen at this point, because, we had to test out all 4 of our endings, which means we had to get the fusion grenade up to the place, we had to get the data module and walk out the door, and you don't want to play all the way through the game just to do that.
We talked about it. We put in the get coordinates so that we could show the coordinates of the room that you're in as you proceed.
Oh, you didn't actually show them how to write that in?
We did that one. We didn't put all of the different debugging things.
Well, that's cool, though, because we can tell them how we ended up debugging it on the end, and I'm sure they can figure out how to write a jump command. Because what we had was, where am I? And we had a jump. And all jump would do is allow me, as a tester, to type jump and then a number, comma number, which is coordinates for a certain room, and I could jump to that room. So the cool thing was I could say, where is the fusion grenade? And it would feed back a new room coordinate. Yep. And then I could just punch that coordinate into the jump command and go right to that room, pick up the grenade, jump to the end of the game, and do my thing. So it allowed a really fast way for me to test stuff out. At the same time, the jump command could have been used to go from room to room and check and see if the appropriate exits were there. I just walked through the game several times. I found that there were parts of the map that were right on the edge of the map that exited off into outer space, and that would crash the game.
Yeah, that's not good for sure.
Because we were stepping outside the scope of our list.
Basically, imagine yourself being all the way up against the left wall where you can't go west anymore. And instead of having an east in there, Zach accidentally added a west door to that room, so you step right outside of the world.
And so I would have to start the game all over. And this goes all the way back to the point where you're going to hate this game by the time you're done with it. And this is one of the reasons why, because you got to keep playing through it over and over again. So it was play through, find an impasse, something where you've messed something up so badly you can't play anymore. Go fix it, start the game over, and keep playing until you get to the next one. Then start the game over, and you just continue this process until you find every single loophole you can. In big production games, they find most of them. Sometimes they find nearly all of them, but in nearly every case, there's going to be some little bug somewhere, because once you get into you move away from simple text adventure games into full-on 3D first-person shooters. There's a lot more possibility. There's a lot more. The games are so much more complex. There's a lot more room for bugs and errors that pop up, and that's why you pay big parties of people to be your testers. Anyway, so moving on from there, once everything was tested, we did a last check on the order of presentation. Do they come across the PDAs in an order that, maybe it doesn't have to necessarily make sense, but it doesn't destroy the storyline in any way, or it doesn't get too confusing, does it? Because really at that point, it would just be a matter of moving items around. Just pull the code out of this one section and put it in another room, and you can fix that. So it's just a last-minute check. Of course, we already discussed testing all the endings. We added a couple of other endings we hadn't thought of yet, and actually we've already talked about those too. What if the assault team hits your 150th turn in your off-world? This is actually where we added those in, is at the very, very last second. And then wrap everything up, get it RAR'd, and get it out there to the gamers so that people could play it. And this would be, when your game goes gold, technically speaking, because now you're sending it on to the publisher and you're done until you decide to write a patch or another way support the game in some way. So That was the whole and the entirety of our iterative process. Now, if we had had, a couple of weeks to knock on this, we might have only just now finished the first iteration of the game, and it would be time to go back through and see what worked and what didn't work and see how we can expand it. But I think for our purposes, we've discussed the process well enough that you guys can understand. You would just kind of continue this process until you're finished. And sometimes you don't necessarily get to say, you don't get to get out the big done stamp and say, it is done, ka-chunk.
Right.
Sometimes time does it for you. You have to get a game out by holiday, or you have to have it done by this time, or, a client needs it by then. And so you got to start hacking stuff off. You got to pull away from what you originally designed and just get it done on time. And that's going to be one of the keys. So that's really all I have for you guys.
I'll just throw in one thing, and that is please keep in mind that this is just a grand overview.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you're creating a more detailed game than this, you would have project management set up.
Oh, yeah.
You would have some sort of system set up for beta testers to enter bugs that they find. It gets a lot deeper. And we might be introducing some of that with the more complex games that we write. And if not for sure in the XNA class, for sure in the future.
Gotcha. Well, and that is so important because you are going to run into those management systems where you can locate a bug and then enter it in so the programmers can find it. But that all ties into these fundamentals we've already covered.
Oh, absolutely.
Where you have to set up these bounds of communication.
Yep.
So
I was just going to say, with that, I think that's going to wrap everything up, and that is going to bring the Hyperion Project to an end, and so concludes our Hello World app.
Wow.
Thanks, guys.